Confirmation bias. Confirmation bias is a mental error where your brain only looks for information that supports what you already believe, while ignoring anything that challenges it. This happens because the brain prefers comfort over confusion, so it avoids ideas that create mental conflict. For example, if someone believes a political opinion, they will mostly watch news that agrees with them and reject opposing views. This bias feels natural, but it slowly traps you in a one-sided worldview. It affects decisions in relationships, business, and investing. The only way to reduce it is to actively seek opposite opinions and compare evidence objectively. Availability bias. Availability bias happens when your brain estimates reality based on how easily examples come to mind, not on actual data. If something is easy to remember, your brain assumes it happens more often than it really does. For example, after watching news about crimes, people may believe crime rates are higher than they are. This happens because dramatic or emotional events are easier to recall. The brain uses this shortcut to save effort, but it distorts judgment. As a result, people overestimate rare dangers and underestimate common risks. Checking statistics instead of relying on memory helps reduce this bias. Anchoring bias. Anchoring bias occurs when your brain depends too heavily on the first piece of information it receives. That first number or idea becomes a reference point, even if it is random or misleading. For example, if a seller shows a price of $1,000 first, then lowers it to $600, the second price feels cheap even if it is still expensive. Your brain automatically compares everything to the first anchor. This is why negotiation and marketing often start with extreme numbers. Once the anchor is set, it becomes very difficult to judge value objectively. Halo effect. The halo effect is when your brain assumes that if someone has one good quality, they must have other good qualities too. For example, if a person is attractive, you might also think they are smart or kind, even without evidence. This bias works like a positive glow that spreads across your judgment. It happens because the brain prefers quick conclusions instead of analyzing each trait separately. The halo effect influences hiring, friendships, and even buying decisions. However, it can be misleading because one strong quality does not guarantee other abilities or good character traits in reality. Negativity bias. Negativity bias is the brain's tendency to focus more on negative experiences than positive ones. This developed as a survival mechanism because early humans needed to remember danger to stay alive. Today, this means criticism, failure, or bad news impacts you more strongly than praise or success. For example, one negative comment can outweigh many positive ones in your mind. This bias can increase stress, anxiety, and overthinking. Even when life is mostly positive, the brain highlights problems first. Being aware of this helps you balance perspective and not overvalue negative events compared to positive ones. Optimism bias. Optimism bias makes your brain believe that good things are more likely to happen to you and bad things are less likely. This creates confidence and motivation, but it can also lead to poor planning. For example, people often think they won't fail exams, get sick, or face financial problems, even when statistics suggest otherwise. The brain prefers hopeful thinking because it reduces stress and increases emotional comfort. However, too much optimism can make people ignore risks and warnings. Balanced thinking is important, hoping for the best while still preparing for realistic outcomes and possible failures. Overconfidence bias. Overconfidence bias happens when people believe their knowledge, skills, or predictions are more accurate than they actually are. The brain overestimates its ability because it remembers successes more clearly than mistakes. This leads to strong certainty even in uncertain situations. For example, investors may believe they can easily predict the market, or students may think they are fully prepared for exams. Overconfidence can result in risky decisions and poor outcomes. It feels like confidence, but it is often based on incomplete understanding. Real improvement comes from questioning yourself and accepting that you might be wrong. Hindsight bias. Hindsight bias is the tendency to believe that an event was predictable after it has already happened. Once you know the result, your brain reconstructs the past to make it seem obvious. For example, after a sports match, people say they knew the winning team would win, even if they were unsure before. This bias creates false confidence in your judgment abilities. It also prevents learning because it makes mistakes seem predictable rather than uncertain. In reality, outcomes are often complex and unpredictable, but the brain simplifies them after the fact to create a sense of clarity. Self-serving bias. Self-serving bias is when people take credit for success but blame external factors for failure. If something goes well, they attribute it to their intelligence or effort. If something goes wrong, they blame luck, conditions, or other people. This helps protect self-esteem and emotional balance. However, it also limits personal growth because it reduces accountability. The brain naturally wants to protect your self-image, even if it distorts reality. Over time, this bias can stop you from learning from mistakes. True improvement requires accepting responsibility for both success and failure equally. Survivorship bias. Survivorship bias occurs when people focus only on successful examples while ignoring failures. This creates a distorted view of reality because you only see the winners. For example, people study successful entrepreneurs and assume their methods guarantee success, forgetting thousands who failed using similar strategies. The brain is naturally drawn to visible success stories because failures are often hidden or forgotten. This leads to unrealistic expectations and poor decision-making. To understand reality correctly, you must study both success and failure, not just the outcomes that survived or became popular in public attention.